Hello learners and welcome to the lecture in this NPTEL course on 20th century poetry. We have been discussing the work of Langston Hughes for quite some time now, and we will conclude that discussion with this lecture. Hughes was a prolific and powerful poet, as I'm sure you have had a chance to witness in my discussion of his work. In addition to blues poems, poems inspired by the blues music tradition, Hughes also wrote a small set of poems inspired by and in indignation and in anger at several horrific and violent acts. These were the lynchings of several black individuals in the southern states. These things were reported in the media, and Hughes, like any other African American scholar and poet, could not help but feel extremely angry, and the indignation as well as the pain of learning about these violent acts was transmuted and synthesized into the poems that we will discuss in this lecture. Before we start reading these examples of poems that I'm calling the Lynch poems, it is useful to have a brief historical overview of what lynching was. A lynching was the public killing of an individual who had not yet received any due process. These executions were often carried out by lawless mobs. The police officers did participate, and they did so under the pretext of justice. So this is the basic definition. It can be universalized. This kind of an act can take place in any part of the world, and if these criteria are met, it qualifies a definition as a lynching. It is a public killing of an individual who has not received any due process, and this is carried out in the name of justice. It is particularly unique to a specific geographical location, and it also began at a specific historical time. So this is why lynchings are associated with the history of 20th century America. Lynchings were violent public acts that white people used to terrorize and control black people in the 19th and the 20th centuries in the USA, particularly in the southern states. Lynchings typically evoke images of black men and women hanging from trees, but they involved other extreme brutalities as well, such as torture, mutilation, decapitation, and desecration. Some victims were even burned alive. My source for these definitions and the information, as well as the historical background to lynching, is the NAACP's homepage. The NAACP is a very well-known American organization which stands for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Now for some historical background. From the year 1882 to the year 1968, almost 5,000 lynchings occurred in the US. Specifically, 4,743 lynchings occurred in the US, according to records maintained by the NAACP. Other accounts, including the Equal Justice Initiative's extensive report on lynching, count slightly different numbers, but it's impossible to know for certain how many lynchings occurred because there was no formal tracking. Many historians believe the true number is underreported. Now, for some more specificity on exactly where these violent acts took place. The highest number of lynchings during this time period occurred in the state of Mississippi, with almost 600, 581 to be precise, that were recorded. The key thing to note is that these are only the recorded lynchings. It's a known fact for everyone who lived through these times, as well as historians who've documented these times, that the actual figure was far, far greater. And that's simply because this was not an activity which people were likely to put in writing or leave a record of, simply because it was not exactly above the law, and whoever undertook these acts did not want to be remembered or did not want to be known for posterity as someone who had undertaken such violent sub judice act of killing. Okay. So Mississippi was first in this infamous ranking, Georgia was second, and Texas was third. Lynchings did not occur in every state. For instance, there are no recorded lynchings in Arizona, Idaho, Maine, Nevada, South Dakota, Vermont, and Wisconsin. Now, who were the victims? Now, of course, typically, and most victims, so the average victim of lynchings were black people. But in fact, they were not the only victims. They were the primary victims. So 72% to be precise, or about 3,500 out of about 5,000. Again, these are recorded numbers, only lynchings which are verifiable through written data were black. But black people weren't the only victims of lynching. Some white people were lynched too, and they were lynched for helping black people or for having a position or opinion that lynching was wrong. So not just black people, but also those who sympathized with black people or those who had anti-lynching opinions. In addition to the African American community and those who took positions in support of the community, outsiders, that is immigrants, individuals who came to America from other countries. Some of these individuals, immigrants from Mexico, China, Australia, and some other countries, were also subjected to the kind of violence that lynching involved. Not surprisingly, the Harlem Renaissance, which was a time when writers and scholars became extremely conscious of the systemic violence that was undertaken in the name of race, as well as the racial identity of writers themselves. Right? During the Harlem Renaissance, several of these writers and poets began to write poems directed at lynchings. They reflected on lynchings, they described lynchings, they described the emotional aftermath of lynchings, and so on. And so this category of poem called the lynching poem came to have a canon of its own, with poems such as Claude McKay's The Lynching, County Cullen's The Black Christ, among others. Perhaps the most famous of all lynching poems is a poem titled Strange Fruit. This is composed by Abel Meeropol, who was a school teacher and who published under the pseudonym of Lewis Allen. The poet Meeropol took the name Lewis Allen after the names of two of his own sons who were stillborn. This poem, Strange Fruit, became famous, almost immortal and iconic, after it was set to music and performed by the extremely popular African American artist Billie Holiday. So before we go further, we'll try and read and understand exactly what this poem is doing in order to get a sense of the emotional terrain that the lynching poem is creating and allowing us to explore. So this is Strange Fruit by Lewis Allen. Southern trees bear strange fruit, blood on the leaves and blood at the root. Black bodies swinging in the southern breeze, strange fruit hanging from the poplar trees. Pastoral scene of the gallant South, the bulging eyes and twisted mouth. The scent of magnolias, sweet and fresh, then the sudden smell of burning flesh. Here is a fruit for the crows to pluck, for the rain to gather, for the wind to suck, for the sun to rot, for the trees to drop. Here is a strange and bitter crop. So the structure of this poem, it has 3 quatrains, that is 3 stanzas, each with 4 lines, and it has a very predictable and very easy to identify rhyme scheme. The first 2 lines of every stanza end with the same sound, and this sound changes with every line. So there is no repetition. Now, very, very simple rhyme scheme, very, very accessible poem. It deals primarily with the literary device of the metaphor. The poetic conceit, the liberty taken by the speaker of these lines, is that they have identified the black bodies that were hung from trees after the lynching was done. In fact, the hanging was sometimes part of the lynching, because oftentimes a lot of individuals were killed. They were hung to death by tying them to a rope and by pulling them up from the other end of the rope, which was passing over a branch of the tree. So this image, this very nightmarish, horrific, almost gothic image of bodies hanging from trees is turned by this poet into an image of a certain kind of fruit, a strange fruit, hanging from trees in the south. Right? The metaphor is developed very beautifully because just as lynchings involve death, the denial of life, trees, the growth of a tree signifies life, not the denial, but the acceptance and the bursting forth of life. So that image also of the tree's growth as a symbol of life is reversed and presented as a dark image. Right? The southern trees have blood on the leaves and the root. So there is something in the soil of the south which ensures that the trees which grow from that soil seem to have blood at the roots. Right? The soil here is not named but implied. And the idea here is that the ideology of racism, the idea that many people, white people in the South, held on to, believed quite vehemently, the idea that the lives of black people are less than human, that black individuals are not really human, that they can be treated like property or like commodities or like animals, like their humanity can be denied, and they can be treated in these very, very violent ways. This is an example of the soil or the air being poisoned, being corrupted by these horrific ideas. And it means that the trees that are growing from that soil will have some horrific and almost poisoned attributes. So the bodies that one can see hanging from these southern trees, they are the fruit of that tree, which means the tree becomes a metaphor for the society of these southern states. And the death of these black individuals is the fruit that these societies have created. Right? If people hold on to beliefs about ideas of race, so for instance, one of the ideas that were very popular in some southern states in the early 20th century in the US was that black people were more disposed towards crime. And specifically, one crime which was frequently talked about and for which many black men and boys were imprisoned and put in jail and often lynched and killed was that there was this stereotype going around that black males were sexually quite promiscuous and that they would be attracted to white females or white women, and they would try and exploit these white women. They would use their bodies and they would commit crimes in order to satisfy themselves or satisfy their lust on the bodies of white women. This was a kind of poisonous idea, extremely inaccurate, no basis in scientific fact at all, and simply created as a way of inflicting violence on black men. This is an instance of the kind of poison that was spreading and circulating in the air and the soil of the southern states. The tree that is nourished by such poison would bear the fruit, which would take the form of the corpses of black men and boys hanging from poplar trees. This is the metaphor that the first stanza establishes and continues to develop, continues to find parallels between the violence committed to the bodies of black people, the visible evidence of such violence. That is, in the second stanza, we are told about the bulging eyes and the twisted mouth. This is compared to the scent of magnolias, sweet and fresh, and the smell of burning flesh. So often a lot of black people were lynched. Some of these lynchings often involved the use of fire and burning alive of, sometimes alive, sometimes dead, the burning of black bodies as well. The smell of magnolias, a tree and a fruit and a flower that flourishes in the heat and the moisture of the south, is compared to the smell of burning flesh. Similarly, the pastoral scene of the gallant south. So these words, the pastoral and gallant, are used here in an ironic manner. The poet's point is that this is everything but pastoral, and this is everything but gallant. Gallant has associations of romance. Gallantry refers to chivalric codes in which men are expected to perform certain roles. Be chivalrous, meaning is to be protective of women, to go and fight wars. And in this context, the word gallant has a negative and derogatory meaning. For the poet, the South is gallant in the most corrupt and misplaced way possible, because in the name of gallantry, they lynch innocent black men and boys. That is, several black men and boys were accused of having assaulted or committed some kind of a violence on white women. And often these were false cases, and the aim of these cases was not simply to protect white women, but rather to inflict violence on black men. So here the poet is calling the South gallant, but actually exposing the hypocrisy and the corruption of the South. And this image continues. The poet continues to find parallels between the natural beauty of the South and this very, very horrific violence that can also be seen as part of the natural landscape of the South. Racism is as natural to the American South as the trees and the fruits and the sunshine is natural to these places. And that idea, that parallel, is conveyed through this image of the violence committed to the black body as a fruit, but not just a fruit, a very strange, poisonous, corrupt fruit that hangs from trees in these southern states. Now, Hughes was a part of this milieu in which poets wrote about lynchings. In the hands of Hughes' sensibility, the lynch poem becomes a powerful means of performing collective grieving. This collective grieving is something that Hughes learned from the elegy, but more particularly, Hughes learned this from the way he adapted the elegy and the way he synthesized it with the blues. So there's something about the black tradition of writing blues, which gave Hughes the power to write specifically capacious forms of elegies. This was not something that contemporary white writers or later on even other white writers who wrote elegies could do. We will have occasion to reflect on the relationship between race, the author's racial identity, and elegy a little bit later. But for now, let us focus on the first Lynch poem that Hughes wrote. This is a poem titled Song for a Dark Girl, published in the year 1927. Way down south in Dixie, break the heart of me, they hung my black young lover to a crossroads tree. Way down south in Dixie, bruised body high in air, I asked the white Lord Jesus, what was the use of prayer? Way down south in Dixie, break the heart of me, love is a naked shadow on a gnarled and naked tree. So this has a little bit of the blues music structure, which is conveyed in the fact that the very first line of every stanza is the same, way down south in Dixie. Dixie is an important word, and we must try and retrace the history of this word. Dixie, also known as Dixie's Land, or I Wish I Was in Dixie, and other titles, is actually a very old song. It's a song about the southern United States, which was first made in the year 1859. So middle of the 19th century, the time of racial tensions between the North and the South, the time when the nation was convulsed in debates about whether or not slavery was divinely sanctioned. So Dixie was a song that was created at a time when states in the South were building a sort of solidarity, a sort of union based on their collective belief that because they were white, they had been blessed by God to own slaves, to trade in slaves. Dixie is one of the most distinctively Southern musical products of the 19th century. It was not a folk song at its creation, but it has since entered the American folk vernacular. The song likely rooted the word Dixie in the American vocabulary as a nickname for the southern US. So Dixie today, and by the time that Hughes was writing, Dixie is a word that connotes something essential about the identity of the American South. There are several popular culture references which today have become deeply associated with the word Dixie. And I'll just name a few. Dixie Chicks is the name of a country music group. Again, country music is also a deeply Southern tradition. It is inspired by blues and other African American traditions, but country music today is predominantly white. So Dixie Chicks is an appropriate name for a group of white female musicians who signal their affinity to the American South. Similarly, there's a very famous song titled The Night They Drove Old Dixie by Joa Baez, the popular American singer and songwriter. The word Dixie originated in the minstrel shows of the 1850s and quickly became popular throughout the United States. During the American Civil War, and this is important to note, given its fractious place between the racial debates, the word was adopted as a de facto national anthem of the Confederacy. The Confederacy was the Southern faction, that is, the group of states who believed that slavery was right, and they were willing to fight with the states in the North. They were willing to separate from the US because they believed so strongly in their so-called right, a God-given right to own slaves. So Dixie became part of the identity of these Confederate states. Songs that the Confederate States used during the American Civil War were the Bonnie Blue Flag and God Save the South. So the word Dixie, when Hughes uses this word, way down south in Dixie, he's signaling to his readers that he is describing something that is happening in a particular location of the country in which they are all currently living. Okay, way down south in Dixie, the speaker of these lines, it becomes clear, is a woman. The title is Song for a Dark Girl, and the dark girl, we come to know, is speaking these lines. So Hughes is writing for the dark girl, but the dark girl is speaking herself in the poem. And the first thing she speaks is that they hung my black young lover to a crossroads tree. Now, two things to note. The first thing is they. The word they signals a clear difference between the identity of the person speaking these lines and the identity of others who do not share anything with her. They refers to groups like the Ku Klux Klan and several other white supremacist organizations. The second thing to note is that the tree on which this woman's black young lover has been hung is a crossroads tree. A crossroads tree is a very unique expression. On one hand, it can simply refer to a tree at a particular location. That is, a tree that is at a place where two roads cross each other. But the word cross also refers to a particular shape that the branches of the tree makes. And the word cross here connects to Christianity. It connects to the kind of values that people in the Deep South lived by. Christianity is developed further in the poem because in the second stanza, the same speaker tells us that she asked the white Lord Jesus what was the use of prayer. Jesus here is called a white Lord. This is a very key use of the word white here. It's not that the speaker has something against Jesus here. In fact, the speaker here is referring not to Jesus, but in fact to the faith that the people who lynched her lover used to justify such acts of lynching. So it is not that Jesus was justifying some kind of violence against black people because Jesus might be white. No, that's not the case. In fact, the speaker is saying that those who believed in their right to lynch people, they often took the name of Jesus. So Jesus was appropriated by people who inflicted racial violence. So it is as if Jesus were white, not that Jesus was white, but the way Jesus was appropriated and the way people committed acts of violence against black people in the name of Jesus means that Jesus had been appropriated and it was as if Jesus were white. Finally, the third stanza concludes this reflection by stating that love is a naked shadow on a gnarled and naked tree. So this person has reached the end of faith, and her question in the second stanza is, what was the use of prayer? This is a secularization of faith because prayer in this case is replaced by grief. The speaker is consumed by grief at the loss of her lover, but she's also in some way confronted with the differences in society. And these differences in society also reveal to her that religion no longer has the power to console her in this moment of grief. Why is that? Partly because religion has been overtaken and religion in some ways is the cause of the grief, because it was these white supremacists, the Ku Klux Klan and several others, who have made Jesus into a white lord and who have used their Christian faith as an excuse to lynch her lover. So she is abandoned by faith and finds that love, which is traditionally used as a term to include people, to draw people in, to give people a sense of community, no longer has any meaning. And so the last two lines of this poem, love is a naked shadow on a gnarled and naked tree, means that the speaker is forced to redefine love for her, looking at the body of her black young lover hanging from a tree and wondering what exactly is the place of religion and how exactly religion could be used to inflict and justify this horrific crime. So, no consolation, no transcendence, no hope, simply an invitation offered in this poem from Langston Hughes to every reader of this poem to think about life and death, and to specifically think about how little Black lives mattered at a particular time in the history of the US. I had promised that we would wrap up our discussion of Hughes in this lecture, but unfortunately we have run out of time in this lecture, so I will take some more time in the next lecture and then wrap up our discussion of Hughes, because there are a couple of more Lynch poems that I would like to study and explain before we move on to other poets. Thank you.